Hey, what is up, guys? So this video is probably going to be one of my most important videos I would say I ever make on the topic of vegan activism and how to respond to certain anti-vegan arguments, particularly because we're going to be talking about the crop deaths argument, which is probably the most common anti-vegan argument there is. I've been seeing the crop deaths though argument, or vegans kill animals too in crop production argument, come up more than ever lately in an attempt to argue against veganism, as well as general hypocrisy though arguments in the form of claiming a vegan is a hypocrite for buying a product whose production process entailed unpleasant work conditions for human workers. I think this video is going to primarily cover the crop deaths though argument, but if there's time at the end, I will definitely cover the whole hypocrisy though arguments in general, and the ones more related to, buying phones and buying clothing and different kinds of items that entail some amount of shitty human work conditions. And to be clear, I'm going to be addressing this topic from a perspective of threshold deontology, which appears to capture my moral system the best. Because of this, I will be touching on things like utility and rule-based objections to particular actions. So first, I'm going to go into what exactly a meat eater means when they make the whole crop deaths though argument, and then go into how it is I actually view crop deaths and how I think that most vegans should begin to view crop deaths. Let's think first about what a meat eater is normally trying to get at when they bring up crop deaths to a vegan. Usually, the basic idea is, oh, your diet causes animal death too, and therefore you're a hypocrite. And either way, our diets cause death, so I don't need to be a vegan. That is crop deaths, though, in its simplest terms. There is much to unpack here, and I first want to cover a very common response vegans give, which, if you're debating an intelligent meat eater, can put you in a position where you have to accept a form of animal farming that I think most vegans shouldn't. The most common response vegans will give is, well, more crop deaths occur as a result of buying animal products because most crops grown are fed to the billions of livestock we slaughter every year. And therefore, in the interest of reducing overall deaths, you should be vegan. So hear me out. I used to give this response all the time, and it does have its merits depending on who you're talking to, but it also has problems. When a vegan says this, without realizing it, they are giving the meat eater the opportunity to bring up a form of animal consumption which requires less deaths than plant farming. The reason for this is because when you make the initial response about how traditional animal farming causes more overall deaths or deaths in general than plant agriculture, and that therefore being vegan is the better option of the two, you are implying that you ought to take the option with less overall deaths. And so if a meat eater can provide an example of animal farming which requires less crop deaths than traditional animal farming and traditional plant farming, the vegan making the initial claim would have to switch over to the lower death version of animal farming, which the meat eater suggests. And as a side note, the meat eater, of course, would need to empirically show that the free-range farms they're postulating do entail less overall deaths than traditional plant farming. This would need to be done in the form of some kind of a comparative analysis. Most non-vegans who bring this up never provide such a thing, but let's continue as if they did, just for the sake of this video. So there are ways you can avoid this situation. Simply put, vegans need to reframe the way in which they think about crop deaths to begin with. There is a huge distinction, which many vegans don't realize is super relevant here, between the crop deaths derived from plant agriculture and the animal deaths derived from animal agriculture in the form of free-range farming, which may cause less crop deaths than plant agriculture. Of course, we're assuming that's the case, just for the sake of this video. This big distinction between the victims of crop deaths and the victims of free-range animal farming is that animals who die in free-range animal farming are bred into existence, whereas the animals who die in crop farming are not. So why does this matter? This matters because it tells us that animal agriculture generates the existence of animals who would have otherwise never existed, who are eventually murdered, while the animals who die in crop fields already exist in the wild, where natural predator-prey cycles are occurring. Some of these animals are eaten alive or killed off by some other form of nature, enduring horrific kinds of death. With this in mind, we really do not have a strong reason to believe that buying crops actually increases overall death or disutility in the world. My point here is not that, okay, crop deaths are a good thing, or that the suffering of the victims of crop deaths is perfectly okay. My point here is that we do not have a strong reason to believe that buying crops actually causes a net increase in disutility or deaths. In fact, there may even be a reason to believe that doing so increases utility, given how much more suffering and death may occur in a wild field compared to a crop field. However, I'm pretty agnostic on that specific point. So just to be clear, when it comes to overall deaths, the relevant difference between buying animal products and plant products is that buying animal products creates beings that will be killed who would have otherwise never existed, and therefore increases overall death. While in the case of buying crops, it is ambiguous as to whether or not there is an increase in overall deaths. This is because buying crops entails some amount of crop deaths of animals that already existed and may have endured a worse death or general state of affairs in the wild. Therefore, we do not have a strong reason to believe that buying crops increases overall deaths or disutility. Here is another way to think of this. You just have to ask yourself the following question. Do I have a compelling reason to believe that buying plant food makes the world a worse place with respect to the overall deaths or disutility of animals? In my case, I cannot identify that compelling reason. Now, if you ask yourself the same question, but with respect to buying grass-fed beef, you can know with certainty that you are making the world a worse place because in doing so, you are generating the existence of animals who would have otherwise never existed, who are eventually murdered, which you know for sure increases overall death. So what about when a person brings up hunting one giant moose per year versus causing crop deaths by eating a vegan diet? If you think about it, this case of animal eating does not entail the breeding of animals, similar to how causing crop deaths does not. Well, again, there is not a reason to believe that causing crop deaths even decreases utility to begin with. In fact, as stated earlier, there may be reason to believe that replacing wild fields with crop fields may actually increase utility because of how much suffering and death occur in the wild. But understand that even if we're agnostic on this one particular aspect of veganism when it comes to utility going up or down, we are not agnostic with arguably the strongest aspect of veganism, which increases utility, which is the part where you don't fund a holocaust of bred into existence animals. With this, we can conclude that going vegan is a good thing with respect to increasing utility. Bringing up hunting one giant moose per year as a kind of moral obligation to commit rather than going vegan, which we've established is good, is quite silly. Unless you are a slave consequentialist and think that even if something is good, like veganism, you ought to always do the thing that is better than that which is good. A similar parallel is saying that it's morally wrong to donate to one charity because you can donate to another charity, which would cause an overall increase in utility. If you're not a slave consequentialist, like I am not, then this doesn't really apply to you. Let's also not forget that utility and death count are not all that matter in morality when it comes to a person like myself who identifies most as a threshold deontologist. One can still deontologically object to killing a moose over buying crops, even if we assumed that killing one giant moose per year resulted in less net animal deaths than buying crops. The nature of killing can matter too. One can deem killing 3 animals out of defense of crops as a morally justifiable rights violation and not think this in the case of hunting a moose who isn't interfering with your existence in any way. Think of this in the human context. If 3 humans, who cannot be reasoned with, are attacking your food supply, and you end up having to kill them, one can view those 3 instances of killing as less bad than going out and killing a single 400-pound bodybuilder to consume for an entire year who is not attacking you in any way. Again, the nature of the killing matters. All right, so now that we've covered crop deaths and how to respond to some of the more reasonable or seemingly reasonable responses that a meat eater can make, let's now talk about the other hypocrisy though arguments outside of crop deaths though. These arguments usually take the form of accusing a vegan of being a hypocrite for buying products such as smartphones, certain clothing, and other consumer goods that resulted in some amount of human suffering. And these kinds of decisions are essentially viewed as incompatible with the reasons one would want to be vegan or with vegan principles. The basic idea is you're supporting products that generate suffering too, therefore you're a hypocrite. All I do in this situation is ask this person to demonstrate how my purchase of, say, a smartphone actually makes the world a worse place or generates disutility. Nobody is going to disagree that there are a variety of awful work conditions within various supply chains. But let's really think about this for a second. Let's assume that I buy a shirt that is the product of shitty work conditions for another person across the world. Yes, these conditions are shitty and we should work to change these conditions. But what reason do we have to believe that buying this shirt increases the amount of disutility in the world? Presumably, the people working these terrible jobs are working the best possible jobs they can. My purchase of a shirt does not cause these workers to be bred into existence. They more than likely are coming from worse conditions or pure poverty and are trying to get by. There may even be a reason to believe that boycotting these businesses could result in the company downsizing, which could result in these workers getting fired, leading to a worse condition, such as being jobless and or more impoverished than they were prior. There is a clear disanalogy in comparing the clear known disutility increase in buying animal products to the unknown utility increase or decrease of buying a shirt that was created in a sweatshop. There would not be a disanalogy if, for some reason, the purchasing of the shirt generated the existence of sentient life that will eventually suffer and die, like the purchasing of animal products does. If these shirts were sentient, then maybe we can have a case here, but the shirts aren't sentient. And let me just be clear about this one more time because this always gets misunderstood when I make this argument. I am not saying there is no good reason to seek reform for these shitty work conditions. Of course we should. That would obviously make the world a better place. I am making a very specific point here. The point is that we do not have a compelling reason to believe that buying a shirt, which is the product of a sweatshop, will result in an increase in disutility in the way that buying animal products does. And therefore, you cannot conclude a vegan is a hypocrite for buying one of these particular shirts. All right, guys, that is the end of the video. Please spread this around. The crop deaths, though, vegans kill animals, though, vegans support bad conditions for workers, though, arguments are all over the place lately, and I feel like vegans need to kind of refine the way in which they respond to these arguments and just really understand what is so wrong with these criticisms. Let me know what you guys think. Do you disagree with me? Do you agree? Let me know below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude, even vegans don't get your weird, stupid